Welcome to Season 2 of Pod Practice, where Mama Bird alumni Quinn Feiner, Mikey Lund, and myself, Alex Atkins, talk about Ultimate from the perspective of players and coaches. We want to engage with you, so please reach out, say hi, ask a question, give some feedback. We look forward to talking with you. To reach out, follow us on Instagram or YouTube at podpractice_pod. Listen on Spotify at Pod Practice, or email us at show@podpracticepod.com. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Today we welcome on Coach Matty Tsang. Matty is the winningest coach of all time, having won 10 national titles with San Francisco Fury and 6 international titles on the world stage. This was an insightful episode where we touch on culture and the national team selection process. So we just got off with Matty, Coach Matty Tsang, and I want to debrief a little bit before we roll into the actual episode with Matty, because holy shit, did that guy blow me away. And he was kind enough to stay on with us while we're waiting for everything to upload and just give us some more off the record stuff. And it was all just so insightful, so genuine. You can really get a good sense of why people love playing for Matty so much. Like I was just feeling inspired and juiced up listening to him talk. And I don't know, I'm curious if you felt the same at all.
Definitely. And I think it goes to show, I think it's easy for people to say Fury, such a good team, that's why they win. They have all this talent. But then when you talk to someone like Matty, I think it really goes to show like what the power of culture and a leader like that can have on a team, because it's one thing to have all the talent, it's another thing to put it all together and come together as a unit. And I agree, just so wise and thoughtful.
Right. Yeah. Their success has not happened by accident. There's been a lot of intentional dedication to the people involved. But yeah, couldn't say more about Matty. I'm looking forward to taking him up on his offer to text and email, and honestly seek advice, some more advice, and just maybe shoot the shit a little bit with Matty.
I think people are gonna really get a lot out of this episode.
For sure. All right. Hope you enjoy this one. Ken, do you want me to go? Is that what we'd agreed on?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
You keep going. Okay. Keep rolling. On the seat of your pants.
By the seat of my pants.
I've never heard that one before.
You never?
No.
Okay.
So common expression.
Like edge of your seat. I've heard that.
Okay. Today we welcome in Matty Tsang, coach, longtime coach of Fury, legend in the sport. Can you give us a bit of background on your playing days before you started coaching? Because I think all of us know Matty Tsang is the Fury head coach and world team coach.
I started playing in Santa Cruz as a freshman in 1990. My roommate and I were like throwing in the quad, and then they had like this big day where you went to sign up for activities, and I signed up for ultimate frisbee and underwater hockey. And then I chose ultimate frisbee. So I played there for 3 years. I guess lost in the semis and nationals in 93 to Black Tide. So that was when Black Tide was
and then dominating.
Back in that day, we actually slept on the nationals fields on Friday night to save money. And so like that never happens. I just remember like coming out of my sleeping bag in my underwear, like stretching and watching the shuttles roll in with the other folks. And yeah, we still made it to semis. And then
old school.
Yeah. And then played on the Bay Area team at that point. I think it was Double Happiness. And there was like a South Bay and an East Bay team, which joined to form that team. And I played with the leftovers of the East Bay team.
Do you know a guy named, I want to say his name was Brian Lochran? A double happiness guy. Does that name sound familiar at all?
No, I don't know, Brian.
Somebody I ran into in Iowa, my Iowa days, I think
Oh, yeah.
did Brian double happiness at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I like in 90 at some place like in the later 90s I blew out my knee, and so and I didn't have insurance, so I was playing on a no ACL, and it was like one of those things whenever you got to semis and finals and it would buckle, right? Because like
Oh
your
my
muscles
gosh.
can kind of hold it together until they got fatigued, and then and that's actually when I started coaching. I went to UC Berkeley. I was playing there, and yeah, I just kind of fell into coaching that way.
Did you have any desire to coach beforehand?
No, it never occurred to me. Yeah, I was just really into playing, and then when I couldn't play, someone on the women's team asked me to help out. And it was interesting. Like they had a coach. Her name was Sarah Savage, who actually spent some
Oh
time.
gosh,
Yes,
Sarah Savage was my only coach ever before I started playing
yeah,
club.
a legend. And what
Yeah,
was cool was like Sarah was, like when I started in Santa Cruz, we were a very good team, right? Like they won nationals, but my captain just told me to run harder and want the disc, right? That was the thing. And then they would like, just get you hyped up and frothing and then go out and play. And Sarah was the first person, Sarah played on the top women's team, won, national championship. She was the first person I met who had ever broken down the game. So like, hey, like this is how your hips should be moving and this is what you're doing. And so I started coaching with her, and then kind of like my mind opened up to like, hey, there's a lot more going on. But honestly, like coaching back in that era, it was like, I mean, if you look at my bookshelf, it's basketball books, soccer books. Like there was no film, there was nothing. And so it was cool to meet somebody who had actually kind of codified the game. And yeah,
yeah.
it was interesting coaching a sport, never having been coached myself. So
Wow, I've never heard anybody bring up Sarah's name. Surprisingly, she is a Hall of Famer though. Like,
yeah.
like legitimately an amazing player and coach. Um, and I played with her in 2004. She was basically retired by then and came out of retirement to play mixed on CLX with me. And yeah, she taught me a lot.
Yeah, she was a fierce competitor. Like Sarah Savage is her nickname, but it was
Yeah,
totally fitting.
it was very fitting.
Yeah, and I felt like I learned so much about just like competition from her, and like kind of what it took to like play at the highest levels for sure.
I want to jump into coaching pretty quickly here. You were just mentioning having soccer books and other sport, like referencing other sports. Just yesterday, I was talking about how my greatest influences are probably not frisbee people. They're people from other sports. Other than I'd say like having known that you are big on culture, and Tina Booth was big on culture, and Bob Cryer, who's I usually credit to be my mentors, big on culture and how important that is. But I feel like the blueprint for winning in sports, or even just becoming a good team, would be a better way to describe it. Is it's laid out there. It's just a lot of those resources are not from Ultimate Frisbee.
For sure.
That said, can you talk about some of like what are some of your main philosophies? Obviously, you've talked about culture a lot in other interviews, but how do you view it? And is it different between the different levels from middle school to Fury to the World Games teams?
I would say it's not. I mean, there's a common thread through all of it. Like, obviously, I just came from middle school practice, which is very different, obviously, from coaching the World Games team. But in terms of like creating, a team experience, it's pretty much the same. Like trying to create something that's beyond yourself, trying to create an atmosphere where you can develop as a person, where you can inspire and be inspired. Like those are all the things that I want at all levels that I coach at. And I think that that's not how I started. I started very much like, with pieces of paper and coins and moving stuff around and coming up with zones. And so like my entry into the sport was very much in the ultimate side. And as I progressed, like there were two reasons. Like one was, when I started coaching Well, two things. When I started coaching Fury, I was actually asked to coach them a year before, and I said no because I didn't like them as a team. I didn't like them as competitors, and my wife actually played for the team at that point. And so there was a cultural component when I decided to coach that team that I wanted to bring in terms of like how I felt like we should conduct ourselves. And then the other thing that happened as it went on was just like, at the top level, everyone's got good talent, everyone's got good strategy. And I felt like culture was a thing that unlocks success on the field and potential. And then I think as I went on even further, now culture for culture's sake is really important. Like I've been around this sport for so long. I have circles of community from my middle schoolers who are now grown. My college team, there's a group that we built a program there, and we still reunite every 2 years. That group of women that I coach the UC Berkeley Pie Queens. And then obviously the Fury players over the generations, right? Like there's folks we're having, our kids hang out now. And so for me, it was a progression of what type of team do I want to be on, to culture unlocking success, to culture for culture's sake. And so, yeah, that's kind of a present for me for all the teams I coach.
Yeah, I'm listening to you talk about culture is like it's so awesome, and it rings so close to home. I think for Bravo in like 2021 to 2022 to even last year, like the biggest differences in those teams from like us making like quarters or getting knocked out in pre-quarters to us then like winning finals somehow and making semis is like the culture on those teams that I saw was just so different. Like we made this great shift in how we viewed the sport and how we viewed culture in our teammates and all that stuff. So listening to that is awesome. And I think a big part of it that I'm kind of curious about from your eyes is what makes a really good teammate, or how to be a really good teammate for your team and build that culture, and kind of also going off that, what makes a good leader and makes a good culture leader as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some aspect, like I think inclusion gets thrown out as a buzzword a lot, but I think like having having a culture that is inclusive and where people feel belonging is really important. And it's kind of interesting. Like, I think there is a struggle about how that happens, right? Like, I think, and, it's been this interesting thing of like coaching many generations of ultimate players. And, it's been this whole thing about like recently, like people showing up as their authentic self has been a big thing, with like sort of the younger generations of players. And, I think I'm still trying to like figure out what all that means, but I do think like there's an aspect of a good teammate of like, I think you do have to show up to the team maybe slightly different than quote unquote your authentic self. I think there's different parts of ourselves that in different contexts that we bring to the table. And I think being on a team, like I remember a couple of years ago, we were like, oh, are we like Fury was like, are we a family, or are we coworkers, right? And I think even those things are weird, right? Like families are really different. And so for me, I think talking about the quality of like, let's be specific about what do we want as teammates and how we show up. And so I think, like no specifics, but I think there's that general thing of like, do we have that conversation, and do we have like kind of an agreement or a norm of like what we expect from each other? And then I think like also coming up with ways to examine how we're doing with that, right? Like how do we receive feedback? How do we talk to each other? And I think those are like kind of, I'm a teacher. And so like one of the things was like, you never stop doing classroom management. And I think you never stop examining, right? It's not like, oh, we dialed it in, we got it, culture, right? Like you all had great success with culture. It's like, we got it. Like we can just follow this roadmap. I think there also has to be ability to like change and evaluate. And I think understanding also with teams, like I've had this experience on teams, there's ups and downs, right? Like you have years that it goes great and you catch it and it feels amazing, and the years that it's a struggle. So like for me, the more I know, the more humble I am about all of that stuff. Is like, this stuff is really organic, and you have to keep on working at it in order to get to the point that it feels really good.
Right.
How do you approach giving feedback to your teams and to different players and your coaches maybe that are coaching with you, like how do you view like when and who to give feedback to?
I usually try to figure out, like, with all the players I'm coaching, kind of what works for them, right? Like, some players, like, come off the field, you give them a couple points and it's great. Some folks come off the field and they remember nothing of what happened, right? And so giving them feedback at that point, like, actually doesn't work. For me, a big part of being coach is that, like, I'm concerned, like, I have a relationship to you as a human being and not just a player on the team. And so, like, how I treat each player hopefully is in that way equal. So it's not about like, hey, this person does a lot for a team, so I spend a lot of time giving them feedback. Like, I really try to get to know folks and have that relationship, and that's important for me. Sometimes that makes it difficult because I think then my check-ins with folks are very long and like, how's your dog doing, right? Like, and it's one interesting thing I learned from Dutchie. Dutchie can give feedback in like 3 sentences. He comes over and he was like, blah, 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 good, and he walks off. And at the national team, you guys were just at a tryout, right? We had to like check in with so many people, and I'm used to like having a half an hour check-in, right? Like, hey, like a preamble, like let's kind of like, and so. In that context, like, I had to learn, like, how do you give like very quick, specific feedback and then just move on. And so, I'm trying to be able to do both. Like, on a team like Fury, I'll do like an initial check-in, which is a sit down and we talk about everything. And then we do a longer check-in also right before nationals. But, folks want more feedback all the time. And so, like, me learning how to like just like pull someone on the sideline at a practice and just give them a few words. I would say I'm still not great at that. Like, when I'm going to practice, I'm thinking so much big picture and how everyone works together, and the individual feedback, I think for me in those circumstances isn't done as well as, somebody else might do it.
Yeah, I relate to it a lot. I think my relationships with each player is definitely different. And I think doing this podcast over the last year and a half with these two is obviously like I've also been with them for a long time, so I have closer ties. But generally, my thought is the better I know people, the more that they trust me, and the less perfect I have to be. Like, I can mess up the communication a little bit more often. Not that I want to, but I think everybody also understands that I coach, that I am not great at conveying an idea simply. So it becomes a little bit more of a collaborative effort when, you do get to know each other over time, and can trip over your words, like kind of like I'm doing right now, to be honest.
It's funny you mentioned that, Mike, too, because sometimes at practice, like you said, you've been coaching me and Kins for a long time. Sometimes people that are like newer to your coaching, after you explain something in a huddle, will come up to me and be like, what the hell was he saying? And I'll just be like, oh, it's this. And I just know, because I've been coached by you for so long, I just know how you communicate and what you're actually trying to say. Even sometimes if it can get like kind of convoluted, it's pretty hilarious.
You're like the Mikey translator.
Yeah.
It's like those Key and Peele skits. What did he just say? Oh, he just wants you to call up line and then like throw the pump fake and then clear. Like, that's all. Matty, I wonder, like, on the same topic of feedback, like, something I think about a lot is I have so many thoughts going through my head in terms of like what I think other people should be doing, what I think the team should be doing, what I should be doing. And I feel like I'm in a constant battle of like, which of these should I be filtering? Which should I put out there into the world? And like, which should I internalize and just kind of like keep inside of me and kind of like let fuel? I wonder what you think about that, and like how you, like, almost in a way, like, what percentage of things and thoughts are you like keeping inside, and what are you choosing to voice?
Yeah, I think most of my thoughts are kept inside. Like, I think, good coaching is like having to edit yourself. I think just understanding is like, most of what you say is not going to be received by the team or the person. So the more you can pare it down. And so the way I would think about, I think if it's like you go out and watch like my middle schoolers, like, right, like complete beginners, everything is wrong. And so like, how do you make that decision? And so I think that decision on a team is Like, what are we working on as a team, right? Are we working on resets right now? Then don't talk about someone's forehand, like side throw, right? Like, let's talk about like what the reset looks like. And when you're throwing to the reset, what should that look like? And so for me, I'm always like using that lens. I think in season, for people like in individual feedback, I'm going to try to work on your strength, right? So I'm going to talk to you about your strength. And if we go talk in the off season or we talk in our initial check-in, I'm going to like, you know what? I'm glad you want to work on that. Do that in the off season. Like, we're in season now. So that's another lens. And then, I have this thing that in terms of strategy, like any strategy that we do, I want 80% of our team to be able to do it. And so that's what I'm going to focus on the 80%. Like I have coached some, top 1% people on the team, but we don't spend time on featuring their top 1%. Like, that's going to come out, but like Alex Snyder could throw anything she wanted on the field. But what we worked on is if we're on the trap sideline, we dump and swing and we get it all the way over and try to turn the corner. And honestly, like, talent aside, that's why we were more successful in Sarasota all those years, right? Like, Revolver was successful in Sarasota. Yes, they had great players, but the reason why they ran side sack was to keep the upside sideline open so they can run it there. And if you notice, like we use 40 yards better than any other team. And so in Sarasota, that would pay off dividends. So, for us, like, so for me, the lens is always, what is our strategy? And then I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. Or what is the cultural component of our team? So let's say it's tempo. So I'm going to like, hey, like, Kins, you stood there and you're looking for your break though. You had an open side forehand right there. Hit the 20-yarder and let's get going, right? Like, so that's my feedback to you. It's because like that's the cultural thing that I want on our team, or the strategic thing. And if you can have that, then it makes it really simple as a coach to operate within that, because it like you take care of all the noise in your head as well. And then it makes it easier for the team because now you have like distilled it down to two simple things.
I struggle with that so much. I always go off into the weeds. I'm like, well, that would be a good look in this situation, or if this happens, and then think about doing that. I very much appreciate or admire the ability to distill things down. That we talk about Nut a lot. He's very good at doing those things in a coaching setting, a teaching setting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like Idris is an assistant coach, and he kind of comes when he can and does a lot of individual stuff. But Idris is one of those people who, like, it's great to talk with him about Ultimate, right? Because it will go everywhere. And I love just like having the conversation. But for him to distill all his thoughts is really hard. So I am his translator. I come off and I'm like, hey, Idris, what do you see? And he doesn't speak in the huddle, but he tells me, and I'm like, that's great. And some of it I'm just putting in a way for my like own, like that's helpful for me to think. Yeah. And some of it I will share. And then I'll say, hey, Idris pointed this out, like, that way. But it's funny, like we definitely have that like kind of translator thing, because like all his thoughts are really interesting, but they might not be useful in that one moment, or in that moment of like the preamble and the postamble and then like the tertiary, thing. But like amazing ultimate mind, right? Like you take all those thoughts, and a lot of what we do have been from these long conversations that we've had.
You're kind of like the funnel, and like all his thoughts get poured in, and then just the few that make it through, and like the filter that go through.
How much do you focus on strategy and tactics these days versus culture?
I mean, I say I focus on it like less. Like I used to do it all the time and watch so much film. And for me now, we have so much knowledge on the team, and a big part of for me is like bringing out those other voices and those other leaders. So, I feel pretty comfortable doing whatever, right? Like on the national team, it's like when I have assistant coaches, like what's your strength, what's your passion? And I feel pretty comfortable if I slot into O, I slot into D, I slot into culture, I slot into big picture. I say I don't know if it's my strength, but the thing that I can bring that a lot of other people can't bring is kind of unifying people on a single vision. So like running team meetings at nationals or in competition, evaluating our strategy in big picture and being able to share that and getting people just like energized and focused on a point, I think I do really well. And often it's difficult to find other folks who are as comfortable doing that and not. But like I like nerding out on Frisbee, but I think given, I have 2 kids, I have a very extensive job that I often am slotted into these other things. So.
Right. And you can still find ways to contribute in a pretty meaningful way, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to go back to something you were talking about, but I'm forgetting, so I may need to jump ahead to.
I had one question that I came to mind when you were talking earlier. I think it's really cool that you coach from middle school. Like in your day-to-day life, you're coaching a middle school practice and then you go to a World Games practice. Like I think that is so humbling because I think a lot of people I could see a lot of people getting to a point when they're coaching a Fury, winning national championships, coaching World Games, and just not coaching like the middle school side of it. And so I think that's really cool. And I wonder, one, like what you feel like you get out of all levels. So, what are you getting the most out of when you're coaching your middle schoolers, and like almost like what keeps bringing you back to the middle school and what keeps bringing you back to the World Games? And 2, like and this is more of like a funny thought that kind of popped into my head while you're talking, like, do you ever see when you're at a middle school practice, like the adult club player, like pop up for like a brief moment in your middle school kid, and vice versa? Do you ever see like at a World Games practice, like the middle schooler of, so-and-so great player, like pop up and you can't help but like look at them through this like middle school lens?
Yeah. I think, I feel very fortunate to have all those levels. And there's so many things like, like I said before, I have a similar goals, like even national teams, like I want to bring to the national teams my idea of what a full team experience can be, right? Like for so many people making a national World Games team, this is like for an individual player, it is about like achieving, like you have a personal goal of achieving the highest level of play, right? And so you have this personal ambition to get to that point. And I want to take that and say, also, this can be an amazing experience, and you can take that and bring that back to your team. So a lot of my thing, because it's such a short life, it's basically taking all these great players, we try to get on some sort of page together, and then we go and compete. So there's not a lot of development, but for me, it's like how do we have that experience? How do you show up as an all-star and then you basically play like a role player with these other great players? And what does that feel like? And what can be bigger than those 8 cones? Like what experience do you take away from that? And like you go back, one of my favorite, stories is about Ryan Farrell, who went back to Bravo and had such an amazing experience. And he was one of my favorite people to coach because of like that journey that he took that season. So there's that. It's been interesting, like, having been selecting, these national teams, like I have all these goals on representation and, I sit there and I was like, I'm too far downstream of this. And so at the middle school level, like we just finished tryouts. It's crazy. We have to cut kids. We have so many people show up and, we had 64 kids show up. We cut it down to 47, 22 of them were girls, 21 of them were kids of color. And so, for me, like at that level, I'm looking at getting people also for a team experience, because middle schoolers just think about themselves. So that's really powerful. Getting folks who never thought of themselves as athletes to become athletes, finding underrepresented folks to come into our sport. So for me, that's really like my experience at the highest level kind of like reaffirms my commitment to how I'm developing and selecting the youth teams that I work for.
The base. Yeah.
And then, Fury's in between, where it's just like these, it's a club season. You develop relationships, you can develop strategy. And so, all of them have this place. And sometimes it's just like right now, it's, everything's overlapping and it's pretty brutal. So it's also likely not sustainable, but it's all.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. It sounds like you coach many, many teams.
I dabble. Well, so amongst the whole teams and just just thinking about the gamut, how do you measure success? You've won, I think, 10 national championships. I didn't even count. Like, I didn't even know which ones were World Games versus WUGC, but something like, I think it's 6 golds in international.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the middle school teams. You've also had a lot of like very successful seasons with like silver medals. I think finals the last, I don't know how many years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Like at this point, I don't know how you feel about winning, if it feels different, or like, can you think of it differently in terms of like, what is the most important thing that you want to get out of a season? And is that in part like influenced by how much you've won?
For sure. Like, I would say, like, it's interesting. At the middle school level, I'm probably the most non-competitive coach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like there's a lot of coaches out there. It's kind of like parents coaching their kids, that they're trying to live their ultimate success through their kids. And I'm really, to a fault, dogmatic about like how I coach the middle schoolers. Like, I've had to like check myself a little bit, because I think I do a lot of things that affect our on-field success in spirit of other things. And, you know, winning has its function in terms of being able to highlight other things and appreciate other things. You know, I think at the Fury level, I was driven very much by personal ambition as a coach. Like, not, you know, like not ego in terms of like, oh, I'm so great, but ego, like I have an ego as like, if I'm doing something, I'm going to go,
right.
like I always say, whole ass. Like, I give everything to it, and like, I want to realize our potential. And I always say on a team like that, like, honor your position. Like, we're lucky to be on this team. There are a lot of great players in many different parts, and they're not on this team that basically every year has the opportunity to win. And I think when you're coaching a team like that, in some ways, like at a very like black and white level, if you don't win, something has been a failure, right? The other side of the coin is only one team can win. But if you have the potential, if you're one of the top 4 or 5 teams, right, like there's a team that's down in the 15, 16 that has no business even thinking they can win a national championship. But so there is that kind of push. But honestly, like, yeah, now, like, do we have I think people's experience of that season and their personal satisfaction and how we work together is really important to me. And it has always been there. But I think that really, like, that's the luxury of having won a lot. And, you know, I often say now in biggest game, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? You lose the game. That's the worst possible thing. And if you can kind of get to that point where understanding that's the worst possible thing, and have you lost that game before? Many people have, and you're still here, right? And so, but, you know, I'm also really cognizant that that is a product of kind of the teams that I've gotten to coach and the success that I've had. So I don't know. It's easy for me to say, like, have that mindset, but I think it's hard. I would say, like, our team in the last couple of years has lost better than we have in the past. And that's been actually really satisfying. Like, the way the team has stayed together, you know, apparently we've just been losing to the Twins. But, you know, we lost to Revo in Worlds, and that was the best. Like, I hadn't seen our team stay together that well in that. And then, you know, lost to them in nationals also. So yeah, I think that's actually been
hard to beat.
Yeah, I know. I was in Colombia and coached them when they were like 13 or something like that.
And they weren't they like right about to go to the 2014?
I coached again. They were on the starting O-line 2012 in Japan. We played them in semis.
That's
maybe.
crazy. Were they actually 12 at that point?
No, or 6? I think they might have been 16-year-olds, but they're on the starting O-line in Japan. Like, first of all, like, going to a foreign country, right? And they're just sitting there, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, so crazy.
Yeah.
And also so happy for the, you know, like, it's interesting. Like, I'm a fan of Ultimate as much as I'm a participant on my team. And yeah, seeing them have that success, and, you know, also other folks on, you know, when Molly beat us, like, you know, Claire Chastain and Lisa P, who was on our team. Like, yeah, I'm a fan of those players just as much. So, like, the pain of losing, and then also, like, really happy for those players. So.
Right. Those two are two people that really deserve to have a championship in their careers.
Yeah. And, I think that's the thing is like, there's lots of players like that who are working so hard and don't get opportunities because of where they live or the team that they're on. Right. Like, and I think that's the one thing is like when I see players on teams that are good enough and aren't, I feel like, for me there's honor and there's disrespect if you're kind of like taking that for granted. And so, that's a big thing for me is honoring your position.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about like World Games and stuff like that in those tournaments. So I'm gonna kind of ask a more specific Worlds question, and I'm kind of curious what the difference is in between WGC and World Games, and in terms of the players you're looking for, constructing that roster. Does versatility matter as much on one side or the other for those teams? Obviously, because the rosters are so different in terms of being mixed and being way smaller. So I'm just kind of curious what the differences are between those two rosters.
Yeah, I mean, I think to take the World Games first, you're looking for the most versatility and expansiveness in your players. And for most, like a big part of your roster, I think, because it's small, right? So like you have 7 women matching players. And as a defender, you're going to have to guard a Colombian style team, a North American style team. Like you might have a big, you might have a small swirly, you might have a big swirly player, right? And so like the more that can be contained in one person, the better shape you are in going to that tournament. And then also realizing with 14 players, one person goes down. Every tournament I've been in, we've had a player go down for a game or two. So now you're playing a person down. So for sure with that, more versatility, more expansiveness of skill set is super important. And then it's less important on this cycle. However, and I think this is something to realize is like all coaches are different. And that's something that I like. Those are the players that I like. Like I want to play a certain style of Ultimate. And so my starting point for selecting one of those teams is generally more hybrid-y, someone who can play O&D, someone who can cut and throw. Like those are the players I value. And I'm very clear about that. Like that's not like, but I think, that's also something to realize when, we just had these roster announcements and like pulling back, you're going to be like, what the hell was this person thinking? But I think understanding that different coaches will select really different teams. And I'm very clear, like my value, like I remember 2016, this person, I'm going to leave their name out of it because thought I got shafted during negotiations. And I'm just like, I gave up this one player and I got 5 of these players. And
between
mixed and it was an outsider. Person wasn't involved in the process, but just so upset. And I'm like, I got these 5 players and I am so excited about it by giving up one superlative, person in many people's mind. But I was like, I just got 5 out of that. And so, so I think World Games, and that's partly why I like the World Games, because it kind of falls into my over, Fury doesn't run O&D lines. This is all my kind of ideology and philosophy. And so, but I'm also pretty clear about that. It could look really differently if somebody else is coaching that team.
Yeah, I have a question about the lines too, but I want to make a comment first because I'm with you in general. I'm biased because I consider myself to be a hybrid. So in general, I look at rosters to be more well-rounded in that way. And I feel like the rosters this year, to no fault or to no good, I don't know, have a lot of specialists on them, which is, exciting. I don't really have an opinion on it. I think it's interesting when I saw them. But to go back to my question is you kind of mentioned, no O&D lines on Fury. I'm just kind of curious about your general philosophy around, playing to depth and running lines. And I watched a video about you talking about how you want to get every player in at least once per game. So just kind of want to hear you talk about depth and your philosophy behind running lines.
Yeah, I think my first thing is that depth is not depth if you just have them on your team. Mm-hmm. Depth has to be played, right? People's our roster's so deep. I was like, well, you don't play those 4 players. So really Is it that like they don't actually need to be on the team, right? Like, and so, you know, for example, like 2012 Worlds, that same where the Twins are there, like I played rookies in the finals and we lost that game. Those rookies went on to be phenomenal players. And so like, and you know, for me, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to win this game, but also like, I will never see this rookie in a pressure situation before there's a pressure situation. Like this is the moment. So I think my first thing is like, if we're talking about depth has to actually play in order to be actually accessing your depth. I think as a coach, whatever subbing system you have, like create a subbing system which forces you to sub wider than, you know, right? Like in pressure situations as coaches, like you're going to get tight. That's a natural thing. That's totally understandable. And people can't criticize you in general if you play your quote unquote stars. And so I think trying to create systems where you have to sub deeper is important, because then when you get in pressure situations, you don't fall as far and get as tight. And then, you know, like for my value is like, and there's drawbacks to this, right? Like I want, more people. Like for me, the O&D thing, I think having an O and D line, the thing that makes sense is it builds chemistry between smaller groups of people, right? And that's why O lines are small. And then, you know, like there's relative strengths, but I feel like we've gotten to this point where we're making a self-fulfilling prophecy by like, as such, you know, like I see the youth level,
totally
like
agree.
someone says I'm a defensive handler and they're a kid. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I don't even teach handlers and cutters to my kids. I was like, if you're near the disc, pick it up. If you're downfield, don't come back to the disc. I don't care. Like, you're not that great. You played 2 years. You're not that much better than this person. Like, you turn it over just as much as the other person. So I think there's that. So, and, you know, like so much language, like, oh, like, you know, we got turns, but we couldn't score. Like, why can't you score? If the disc is in your hand, why can't you move it? And if you turn the disc over, why can't you guard why can't you stay close to the person who is close to you, right? And for sure, that's an oversimplification, right? Like we have superlative defenders, we have superlative goal scorers, and the drawback to kind of my philosophy is sometimes those people don't reach their full ceiling or potential. Like I've had that experience where, like I remember Claire Desmond was on her team, and like if anyone knows Claire Desmond and what she became, like complete player. She was being coached on U24 by Jit or maybe Witt, one of them, you know, Colorado.
Yeah.
And Witt went to her. One of them just said, it was like, I just want you to score goals. And she would go score 8 goals a game, right? Because she was so good. And when she did it for my check-in, I was like, you know what? My vision is like, you could score goals, but I think you could also come under and throw big throws. And I think you also could guard, you know, cutters. And I think you could also guard handlers. And she became a person who was a World Games type player. But in the short run, like, I think she struggled a lot because I didn't give her that one thing. And that's something I've had to reflect on. And then I've had players who never developed a more expansive skill set. And that might have been unfair to them because you know what? They were actually a really good goal scorer. And I should have just been like, go catch goals, go have fun with that.
We were just kind of talking about this yesterday, actually. How we feel like we do pigeonhole people. We don't give them the offensive opportunities. I think you mentioned about getting everybody in every game in an maybe you did I think a talk on subbing at some point for Sky, or maybe it was a Bay Area thing, and like how it pays dividends down the road too. All of a sudden they feel extra confidence, and it is they're more empowered. So when they're put in that situation again, that they're not going to feel like they don't belong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think the subbing thing, the no O no D is it? I guess it's probably pretty hard to answer this question, but is it something that you really just have to commit to build, or do you think it is also, you have a lot of fucking good players on Fury, for instance, like, can you speak to that? Do you think you could do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think obviously we have an easier time because we have a lot of good players and we have a lot of players who can play OND, right? Like some of our best defenders, like I have no problem putting them on right a universe O line. Like it wouldn't bother me at all. And on those teams, there are some players who are better than one or the other. And so you'll notice like some of those peoples in those bigger points aren't playing a D point, even though their line is up. So if you were to say, okay, now you just switched out like 6 of those players, like what would you do? But I think I would still try to do like, I do think it's like the self-fulfilling process. Like you need to actually play it and do it and practice. Like I talked to some of the World Games players, like, you're a D-line player. What does your practice look like? And if all your reps are like, hey, yeah, we never received the pool, and like 2/3 of your reps are defensive, then like we're not setting those folks up for offense, right? And so I think there's like I'm very cognizant that yeah, I'm in a specific situation on Fury, but I also think that how even in college, like we didn't run O and D lines. We had better players that that would play more O and D, but like I think always trying to push that and like even if you're running O and D lines, can you run more reps where suddenly we don't have this narrative like we got turns but we couldn't bank breaks, or our O turned it over and then couldn't play D. Like I think can we get to a place where we're actually setting up our players for success in both of those areas?
It's actually been kind of like the last couple of years, I think, almost like a pet peeve of mine, or I just have been noticing it more that like whenever we have a D-line player, and this would be like for club or college as well, like they never receive pulls like to play offense. And I think for like a while I didn't know exactly why that like, I thought that was wrong. Like I understand the argument of like, well, they're D-line players, so like they start from a stop disc because when they're playing, they're gonna play offense from a stop disc. So even if they're getting like a lot of offensive reps at practice, like from a stop disc, but I think like even thinking about it now and in this conversation, like just the mindset of like I'm also an offensive player. Like so you're not just someone who plays defense, you're also an offensive player. I think that can be so valuable. And I think like I was thinking about this. I went to a bird practice the other day, and like even just what kind of like struck me was like it was, and they're unfortunately like their practices are a little shorter than they've been in the past. Like now they can only be like an hour and a half, and they've used to been like 2 hours. But it was just like so, and maybe it was a practice that was more focused on the O line anyway, but it was just so focused on the O line getting offensive reps that like I just think for me, especially for kids who are in college, like it just seems so important to like let everyone play all these different positions and let them like develop the different skills. And I think like so much of it is that mindset of like you're not like in college already, you shouldn't be identifying as a D-line cutter. Like there's so much room for you. And like I think it's so funny because in college, like when I was in college, like I thought, like this was it. Like I'm old now, like especially as like I'm a 5th year, like this is what I'm gonna be like as I grow up. Like I don't see like the 10 more years of ultimate that I'm gonna be a player, but like it's so detrimental to be thinking of yourself as the D-line cutter in college already. And I think like it's just an interesting balance of weighing like what you were talking about, like the specialization and like the chemistry that these lines can get, balancing that with like the overall growth that you could see on teams who are practicing more universally for all their players. And I just think that is such an interesting balance. And I feel like it's heavily right now in the sport weighed towards the specializing. And it'd be really interesting to see more teams and programs pop up with like the more universal style and just like see what that kind of looks like in terms of development and like success on the field as well.
Yeah, and I even think about like now, let's say your D is having to scout 16 players as opposed to 8.
Right.
Right now it's like, hey, I know what your matchups are, and like we get on the line, but like if it's now 14 or 15, like that strategically is like, and now you got to make sure you have enough defenders for all those players. And can you run lines that run 2 slightly different offenses, right? Like I think there's a lot of strategic ways to play with that if we develop it. And I would love to see that happen with our sport. And I think, I think if we were doing that more at maybe at the younger levels, then we could at clubs still specialize, right? But I remember talking to Jimmy Mickle about it, and he was like, "Yeah, like for my whole life, right? Obviously, one of one, superlative player, and so like I wouldn't not have him have an offensive focus, but even when he's put on D lines, he's put on D lines for the O,
Right.
and I was like, your O is already there. Like, why don't you be put on D line and like work on the D, right? Like." And so I think, like a player like that, obviously like one of one and like throughout his whole career has always, you got to leverage what he's really good at. But I was like, what if there was more opportunities where, right? Obviously he's got a great pull, right? Like what if he pulls and comes down and just locks someone up and he's got a certain person, like he also has that part of his identity. And, like I hear, obviously, defensive players have a certain mindset. I'm going to go down and I'm going to froth and I like, don't care. And then when I get the disc, then I'm going to try to calm down. I was like, can you froth in your mind and then receive a pull? Like, or I talk to people like, why don't you just throw it real deep? And if you turn it over, then you're going to be playing D again. It's like a pull. Like,
I'm just thinking about like the workout you would do for that. Like just go like sprint for a mile and then just like try to like do something meditative for immediately afterwards.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
I wonder if our sport is unique in that way, because I think about a lot of other sports though, and I see like so much specialization, like in like soccer or like American football, like everything. It's like so specialized. Like in soccer, you have some of the players like the midfielders who can do it all, but then you definitely have like these specific builds who are like the center backs, the wing backs, the strikers, and like it's very clear. And then I wonder honestly, like that's why it's so interesting, because we're still in a young point of our sport, because like maybe we will get to that, like maybe we think like this universal is great, but then we're gonna get to the point in like 30 years that like no, you actually want like two really short like hyper quick guys, you need like two uber tall guys that are just like centers, and then you got like three more like midfielders. It's just so interesting to think about. And I also have been thinking a lot about the frothing at the mouth thing, because I live with one bird guy. Well, that just used to be me so much. Like, I used to love the caffeine go, especially like when I was younger and I played on patrol and I was D-line, like the caffeine go run as hard as you can. And the past couple of seasons of being hurt have really showed me that frothing at the mouth kins is nowhere near as good as like calm meditative kins.
For example, Matty, before we played Empire this past AEDL season, Kins had drank like 2 cold brews out of a can that had like almost 200 milligrams in each.
No, it was just one. It was just one.
He was off some absurd amount of caffeine. He had 2. He was at like 400 milligrams of caffeine like right before the game. And then Ben Yacht comes down on him and marks him on like the first point and is in his face going, "Here comes a turn. 3, 2, 1, you're going to turn it." And then Kins is just going crazy for the entire game, like talking shit to the sideline, like everything. So that was this year. So let's not say
that's true. I haven't grown that much, but I'm getting there. Like slowly over time, I'm really realizing meditative Kins is better, because that's funny, because that actually wasn't frothing at the mouth, but towards the end of the game, I was on the sideline and the trainer goes, "You all right? Like you're a little pale in the face." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't. And I've never cramped that bad. So any youngsters listening out there, like I know it's so popular to drink a Red Bull and go play some D points, and like that's super fun, but maybe try like taking some deep breaths before the game, and no caffeine. I really suggest no caffeine, like unless you really need it. Like I find that, which is funny because this season I drank 2 caffeines. So I was playing around with a lot of things, but I really think now the no caffeine is the way to go.
Zenkins. Yeah, I have a couple of anecdotes, and I maybe we'll shift topics a little bit here. About that situation specifically, like I felt like Kins was just adamant at beating Yacht's strength in the deep space, and where Kins really excels is that he can shift from downfield to the backfield so seamlessly. And like I'll take a little bit of blame, because I gave you the option instead of saying, "Hey, you need to go in the backfield," where I think you you have a clear advantage over yacht in those small spaces. But I don't think anybody's getting yacht in the air consistently except for Babbitt right now.
That's definitely the dumbest, most recent thing I've done on a frisbee field, and the caffeine did not help the decision-making process of that. Like, you're right that I was so dead set on skying yacht in an ADL game.
You were so dead set on it that you wanted me to throw you a jump ball.
I wanted it so bad
in the middle of you were like,
I just wanted someone to put it up.
like
I maintained that I would have caught it. I caught the one at half. I caught the one at half. I would have caught the other ones.
Kins is like in my face in between points. Like, why didn't you throw that? I'm like, he was like, you didn't even have a step on him. He's like, just throw it. I'm just like,
man, I wish we were at East Coast tryouts so we could just ask you and just.
No one throws it. Rightfully so. Like, most people don't put it up when yacht is there. And that's honestly one of my like bigger weaknesses. I want people to just like throw up 50-50 balls to me. And I don't know if that's like an actual good way to play Ultimate, but it feels like for me, it feels like people should just like, if I had the disc, I would throw it to myself every time. Like, no doubt. And I wish
you should just play 20 years ago.
I wish that could happen, but anyway.
And it's hilarious because I didn't throw it deep to you when yacht was on you, but when yacht was on me, you threw it deep to me.
I threw it, dude. I didn't put it up. I should have put it up for you.
You should have.
I just next time you'll put it up, right, Quinn? I have your word.
All right. Yeah. Speaking of East Coast tryouts, Matty, though, and roster selections, kind of shifting not away from this cycle into the cycle that you may be thinking ahead to. Actually, one quick note on this year's roster construction, and you mentioning different coaches would select much differently. I'll put on the record that I'll take one more step back, and that is somebody recently gave me credit, said that, Mike, if you were one of these coaches, you would have been trying to be actively unbiased. And I thought about it a little bit. I was like, no, I would have taken Atkins. I would have taken Jarvis. I would have taken I would have taken Bravo guys. Like, there's no question in my mind. I'm not asking you to comment on whether or not you have those biases or if the current coaches do, but I will. I do want to say, put it on the record that Alex, you would be on my any Worlds team that if I were coaching it.
That makes me feel so much better, Mikey. Thank you.
I hope so. I'm sure it doesn't, but I do want to maybe shift gears towards World Games. I know that you were at the tryouts. I assume to help a little bit with selections, but I think also in preparation for the next cycle. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the preparation that you're seeking, especially and comparing it to other national teams from other countries?
Yeah, I think, why we're doing it this way is because I felt like at the last World Games that we were just at, like, every single team practiced more than we did. And so I didn't feel like we were as well prepared. Like, it was like by a factor of a lot, right? Like, there, some the Aussies are generally on a year, like a pretty long cycle. But yeah, the Germans were practicing multiple times a month for many months, Japan as well. And so, I wanted to practice more, in general for us, it's like, we try to get together. We have 3 practices. We try to get on the same page offensively, the first 2, and then we try to have some defense, and like, Miranda had all these defense like zones that she wanted to do, and we just never got to that point. And then we play like the Aussies, and they switch gender agnostic. They have a lot of nice zones. The Germans had really good offensive chemistry, which was hard to stop. So, but like, we're in the cycle, and so practicing, and the US is a pretty big place, so it wasn't going to happen. So my goal was to, a lot of, as I said before, like, the way I like to coach is I want to know players. And so my goal was to be involved this cycle, get to know some players, observe the practices of the different teams. If there's any sort of strategies that were common, then, I could adopt that pretty easily. And just so we hopefully had a leg up on that stuff. Like, I didn't have to like catch up taking care of some of that stuff. So once we got in season for World Games, that at least I'd be in a better position, I think, to coach the team. I also wanted to see the competition out there, right? Like going into the World Games with the pandemic, it was like I had no idea who the players were. And so that was really difficult. And then, like the other thing that I was telling USAU is like on my own during those cycles, I watch a lot of men's divisions teams, but I don't do that. Like that's kind of on my own. And so like you're kind of depending, it's not really fair, right? Like it's already hard to coach a club team and spend all the time there. But now I'm like watching, and I do some of it just on my own for strategy. Like I watch a lot of Machine last couple of years just to like kind of see their switching defenses and what they were doing. But now, I don't spend any time watching Dig, but now like, so I think it was also to put me in the mindset of like, okay, like I know I'm going to have this position. And so let me put in the time for that. And then honestly, like being on the mixed field for 2 tryouts was really great. Like I don't watch that much mixed, like right every 4 years, I kind of get more involved in the year before. But like I felt like my mind really started churning and thinking about mixed ultimate and mixed strategy. And so that was really helpful for me. And yeah, it was really fun meeting all the players. I would say like I spent a lot of time watching the male matching players and a lot of the young players, like, like you folks here, all 3 of you, no, younger folks. And yeah, like it was fun watching Kins and Quinn play. And like, honestly, a lot of, so many of the Bravo players, like it was super impressive. Like it made me feel really, I think there's 2 things, like the talent in the male matching side. A lot of these kids are still in college and also best throwers on their club teams. Like that's pretty interesting right now. And having conversations with folks like pretty aware. And so it kind of gave me like, hope like our sport is in a pretty good place. And so that was really fun. And yeah, there's so many Bravo players that are good and young. And I'd be interested in like to be frank, is like how did you all feel about like Bravo representation? Because that's obviously a big thing. And looking at Truck and Pony, and then also thinking about if Osgar, Jack Williams, Babbitt, Grant, I don't know who else was also on Pony. Like I'd be interested in hearing from, because that's always the chatter. But like your
Conrad playing probably Germany, I assume.
What was that?
I assume Conrad's playing
Germany.
Conrad.
Yeah, Conrad would definitely be on the German team.
And Sam Little. Yeah. I'm happy to give my take first. I don't know if it's a little bit sensitive for these 2 or not, but like what you just mentioned is ringing pretty heavily in my head of like if Osgar, Jack try out, they are as sure of things as locks, in my opinion. Having no experience of coaching or selecting a national team, I would be looking at those 2 guys as cornerstone pieces. Keegan has played at that level as he's been selected on a previous roster. Jimmy's obviously a legend and a one of one, arguably the best player of all time.
The GOAT.
And the men's side. Babbitt, Sam, like, and then you take those, I don't know if it's 5 or 6 names, and then say there's still room for 8 Pony players across both rosters. It's definitely a hard pill for me to swallow, just because like I want to see my guys out there, especially. I think you've mentioned this, and I know talking to Bob, he's mentioned this. Other coaches that I've talked to who are in the selection process mention. I think you specifically mentioned finding like duos and trios that play well together in I think the LT World interview a year ago or so. And I definitely understand that. I wonder, like, does that mean if you are a teammate of one of these locks, does that give you a kind of a leg up? I don't know. This is me just thinking, like, why are these players on the team versus these other ones? Like, it makes sense that Truck's O-line, for instance, like they would do just fine in any stage, in my opinion. Like they would probably be more than qualified to just send their O-line. They'll probably do just fine in the men's division. And they have that chemistry piece. They have all those little nuances. But I don't know. This is also, again, me.
Well, I think the first thing, like when I was talking about trios and duos, like that was at the World Games level. I don't think I would do that with this team. And actually, the more interesting thing, like, and this is me as a coach, like for one of those teams, like my more interesting thing is seeing folks from different teams work together. Like that would be my first.
Right.
And, you know, like one thing I would say is like where you start, like as a coaching staff, where you start building a roster affects downstream, like who you end up selecting. Right. So
that makes sense.
I'm starting with that, like, hey, I'm interested with what a ring player looks like with a Bravo.
It's so fun to just like play it out too. Yeah, and yeah. Sorry to sort of interrupt here, but in that same vein, we were talking with we had a live chat yesterday with some folks because we were watching Northwest Challenge, and I don't know. At least in this format, I kind of feel like the U.S. is still so dominant that I feel like that's a better experience. Like I want to see what it's like to have these U.S. teams mesh. Like I don't want to see maybe this is me talking as a fan and a butthurt biased coach. I want to see what it's like to mesh these different people. Like I think like that is a cool experience of like building that U.S. community. Versus like I'm sure also like Bravo guys would love to play with their Bravo teammates, and everybody would love to. It's probably more fun if you make it with your friends, your close friends. I don't know. I think you kind of understand what I'm saying. Like,
for sure. Like I'd be interested from you all, like, you know, so I go through this a lot, right? Coaching Fury, and I have. So the parameters I've set on my team is I have a certain number. I was like, I don't want more than 4 Furies on my team. I'm never first to speak about my own players. Like other people talk about them. Like I kind of say, you know, but, you know, I'd be curious, like for you all, you know, because I think like you're most affected, like, you know, as players, like, what do you think, like, should there be a quota on the number of folks from each team? Like, right, there is no guidance, and I have a self-imposed guidance. Like there's a lot of like aspects of like I'm the Fury coach, and there's a lot of Fury players that play, and a lot of ones that like self-fulfilling prophecy get opportunities. There's also a lot of Fury players who are better than a lot of other players who don't get to be on these teams. And for me, like my language to them is like, you get a lot of privilege being on Fury, and this is one of the circumstances that if you played on Schwa, you would be on this team, but you don't. And you, like, I feel bad for you. You're quote unquote deserving, but like, you also get to play on Fury during a club season. Right. There's a lot of privilege there. So, but, you know, I'd be interested in like, for you, like, you know, and I think somewhat like, you know, the consolidation of talent, but, you know, like, I think it is tough. Like, I get it from like, Bravo's been a successful team, won a national champion, been in semis, have a lot of fucking good players. Like I saw that. And like for you, if you were looking at that, also knowing the landscape of the teams you play against of Truck Stop and Pony and Ring and Machine, right? Like what in your mind in a vacuum, let's say we took away the fact that we know Jack and, you know, all those people, like what would be a good number, right? Do you think, or like if you're a coaching staff, like what would you set as your parameters to try to get to? And then obviously then you have to like go into the specifics, but you know, I'd be curious, like, because I know what I've been doing, but yeah, like what's the exercise for you all, you know, having a very visceral experience, just having that, you know.
Quinn or Kinsey, I have a thought.
I'm trying to put it into words, I guess. First and foremost, like everybody on the team is deserving. Like they're all amazing players. But yeah, it's hard to just put like a quota on it. Like it's very surprising to look at the teams and say like, well, Bravo and Machine were in semis and Machine was
in finals.
And we won finals the year before. And to see us have a combined 3 players is pretty shocking. And then like, not to go back to it, but to consider that like 4 of Pony's arguably best players aren't even trying out. Is crazy. Like, it is crazy, but it's so hard. I don't think there needs to be a quota in my mind. I think they, the coaches are the coaches for a reason, and they're allowed to make decisions that they deem are fitting. And I think every single time that a coach does that, it's going to catch a lot of backlash. Let's say theoretically, even if they get the roster 100% right, quote unquote, which like isn't a real thing, right? Like, they're still going to get backlash from a ton of people and a lot of groups of people. So it's just like, it's a thankless job, and you just have to be ready for that at a certain point. But that didn't really answer the question. I just kind of like brain vomited my thoughts in general. I don't know, Kins, if you have a better answer for the question.
I don't even remember what the exact initial question is anymore, but
Just
I agree.
Your opinion about about the decision making process.
Well, I agree with Quinn. I think I think there's danger in having like a quota. I don't think you should have like hard rules or numbers, because I think that can get you into trouble. But I think and I also agree that no matter what team is picked, there's going to be negative, like, oh, this person's better than this person. So, that's always going to happen no matter what. But I do think like there needs to be, it's important that there's a diversity of thought, places, all sorts of different things in the process, because like no matter which way you look at it, it's not going to look good that there's 2 coaches of Pony on the team, and then they also have like a huge amount of players selected on the team. Like, that's a clear thing to just like point out, like, and the fact that most of their good players didn't try out for the team. Like, no matter where you look at it, like,
I know what you mean, but
what?
Well, they're all good though.
Well, but that's what we're saying is like they're all good. Like all the guys on Machine are good. All the guys on Bravo are good. Like, they're all good, and so that's why I think it's important to have the diversity, because like, and where I think it comes into play is like, you, in the same vein that like you could pick any team and have people upset no matter what, like that also means that a lot of the guys on the roster are interchangeable. And so you shouldn't, especially if you are the coach of a team, you shouldn't pick players on your team that you could easily pick. If you could swap a player from Machine or Bravo or Dig or whatever for one of your own players, and like, I think that has to be a part of the process, unless you think like so clearly that these guys on your team
it's
are like,
case by case, right?
Of course it's case by case. So, but I think like that is important to have, because I don't think you should select like your guys over other guys unless you like feel super strongly. And then that also just brings the point of like needing other people's opinions, I guess, like when they make the team. Cause
if I were selecting the team, I do think I'd like to think that I would at least seek the advice of people who'd done it before me. Like you, Matty, like I or Bob, like I know that Bob he always tells me that it's an impossible task. It's really difficult. Like, he spends before the under 24 teams, he's scouting college tournaments like crazy, and he has the assistants doing that too, and getting to know them. I wonder. I want to ask you about from your opinion, Matty, on like. Actually, Saul Yannick asked a good question, and it kind of segues into this. See, let me look it up really quickly. He said, I'd love to hear Matty speak on his experience of coaching more externally intense, emotional players. He listed a couple names, and I'll skip over that for now. He said, I'm sure he's coached plenty more, and how he approaches that differently, if at all, from coaching someone who's more emotionally steady all the time. And and I'll add to that. I think like if you're selecting a team that doesn't have a ton of time to build, you have limited practices. Well, we always do, but very limited practices. Does that come into consideration? Like, I don't have enough time to build that rapport that you love to build, and I do too with my players. Like, if you know that you could in a long club season. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I'm going to use Atkins as an example because we've had a years long time to build a relationship and rapport, and we've had a lot of challenges over the years. I think it's fair to say, but I think we're better for it, and I value that so much. But I don't know that I would have the time to get to know. So if like I'll use Mansfield as an example. I think he's an amazing player. I happen to think that he's very fiery, and I don't know if he and I would see eye to eye right away, but I imagine we would because we have a common goal of being great.
Well, yeah, there's a lot there. I would say like, I think one of the things is like the national team selection is like a big black box, right? And so everyone kind of like expresses opinions. I would say like what I said before is your starting position really affects what it looks like. So, if you have a starting position, let's say the men's team was like, oh, we're going to have an O line and 2 D lines. Once you fill your O line, like your D line starts, like there's a downstream effect.
Right.
The women's team is like, oh, we're playing Canada. They've got 4 big bodies. Like, those rosters are out. We have to match up with 4 big bodies, 2 who play at the line of scrimmage. One's a hybrid, one's who's a deep. That's going to affect, if you start from there, that's going to affect, quote unquote, oh, you didn't take it as good of a player as the other one. It was like, well, you didn't consider that part. Another part is like, if someone tries out, like my starting point often is like, who tries out the best, right? And you can look at our 2020 roster that never played, and you're like, Aaron Schroeder was probably like one of the picks in the last 8. She was probably the second or third best player in the tryout at all, and she was a starting point. And I think someone looking outside was like, who is that? Like, that player is not that player. Like, I know these other names, but like for me, that was a starting point. Like, if your starting point is like me, like hybridy people, it affects downstream with those other things. If you're then, selecting for, like, to your point of like, I actually need a personality that's going to lead my team very quickly. Right. That's another factor. It's like, okay, we did this, like we're taking this handler, and everyone's like, why would you take that handler? It's like, you know what? That person actually is going to get everyone in line, is going to draw respect from both the men and the, women on the team. Right. Like there's all these other factors. And I think the starting point really affects downstream what happens. And so I would say my experience with most staffs is that they're trying to do a good job of that. You can argue that they don't, for sure. Like, and I'm really cognizant of that. But I think for me is like, there's a lot of factors that are going into it. And then there's a negotiation, right? There's 3 teams, and like, you want certain players and you don't, and there's horse trading that's happening. Like, I really want this person, I'm going to trade you 2 for there. And so I think there's that. I think
that's a good point. That's one that I never think about.
Yeah. And, like, to me, like when I've talked to like newer coaches, like, do you know the matchups that you are going to have? Like all these rosters out, you have to go into selection knowing that already. You have to be clear on what your philosophy, like, like Dutchy used to do 3 lines, right? Like an OD and a swing line. Like that affects what it looks like. And suddenly, like, if you fill up your O line and then now you're looking for D people who can also play a little bit of O, like that affects your decision making. I think there's also an aspect of representation, whether it's by teams. Like I think like you can look and some people get criticized the other way. It's like, why is this person on the roster? It was like, it's a national team. Like people should get these opportunities. Like national teams should feed our national our club teams. And I'm really, and so if you're starting from that point, it might be like, hey, we need at least like, let's work hard to get 4 Bravos on this team, right? If that's your starting point, you start that point, then you're going to get criticized for something else for sure, right? And then I think the other black boxes there's a lot of folks that decline, like Spicer declined afterward, right? Like likely makes a roster. There's people, Bansfield declined. I actually think, like there's people who were in the pool who didn't apply. There's all these things, sort of factors that can affect team representation. And then, we had an experience that in 2016 that we took a lot of brute players, but the year before, Leanne and Cammy, all these top players were playing, in Chicago.
Right.
And I was like, you do a redistribution of this in a different year, right? Like, think about like what pony players, how many pony players migrated. So, I agree. It was like having quotas doesn't make sense. I think having safeguards and people around you to check your bias is really important.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks do that behind the scenes. And for sure, we could do a better job.
It's an impossible task, though,
Yeah.
for sure.
I'm curious too. This is kind of a deep conversation, but if this isn't a super deep question, I'm kind of curious if the East Coast what do you think? If the East Coast tryout was before the West Coast tryouts, would the roster be different? Like, because you're talking about like all these down chain effects, and like if you see someone at East Coast, you're like, oh, that guy. Like you see Chris Kocher, you're like, oh, that guy. Like obviously Chris is going to make it. Chris is incredible. But do you think the roster would have been different if East Coast was first and not West Coast?
I mean, I'm humble enough to say that, yeah. I think this process is highly subjective.
Mhm.
I don't think it's unfair. Like, I think people are trying to make it fair, but there's so much, like the coaches are different. Like they just went through one tryout, and then like are better coaches, right? Like we get more reps at something. We've had situations where weather is super different. I would say like on the mixed field, the mixed play was better. Like people play better together. I don't know what the reasoning is behind that. Like, I don't know if it's because of better coaching or what it was. Like, it could be like, there's a lot of Ring and Phoenix players that play a lot together. And so maybe that made it better. So there, there's so many factors. And I think, you're trying to do a better job. Like, I feel like we should constantly be improving how we select. It's amazing how, like I say, there's a lot of like, when you hear 5 people talk about play, there's a lot of like agreement, but there's some players where their folks are on the same field and they see completely different things, right? And it's all based on your assumptions and expectations, right? Like when I saw Spicer on the field, I wasn't watching his defense. Like, right. Like for me, I was like, I've already watched his defense. I'm watching offense. Like on the turn, what does he look like? But that's because I'm coming in with a thing was like, oh yeah, I'm already stipulating this other thing I'm looking for. But somebody else is watching that, and I was like, oh, I didn't even note it, right? Like, so I think there's all these sort of assumptions you go in, and right, like even if you watch one player, and I said, and you're like, I told you they were 23, and you're like, fuck, that guy is good, and then I told you they were 29, and you're like, right.
Yeah.
Right, like you see exactly the same thing, and yet your expectations is suddenly like, like I talk about this in tryouts all the time. Like people love the shiny new thing, right? Everyone likes the shiny new thing, and I like old weathered. For sure. But so I think that's one of the things to consider is like, and probably in this room you have disagreements on players, right? And you watch them all the time, and you're like, that guy is amazing, that guy sucks, right? Like.
Yeah.
I mean, I could watch these guys play the same point over and over on film and have different opinions about it each time. Just depends on what you're looking at.
Yeah.
I actually did want to. I feel like I probably diluted Saul's question a little bit.
Yeah. So, remind me again what
he was
the ultimate nerd. He knows so much.
Yes, the ultimate nerd. We call him the ultimate nerd too.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like talking about the differences. Can you talk about the differences of coaching someone with a more fiery personality versus someone who's very stoic? I do want to get his question right, so maybe I'll read it just one more time. Speak on your experience of coaching more externally intense emotional players, and how he approaches that differently from coaching someone who's more emotionally steady all the time.
I don't know if I mean, I approach everyone differently. For me, I never.
That might not be like the defining characteristic.
Yeah, I mean, I like both. For me, it's like interesting, like Dylan Freechild, right? Very outwardly emotional. Cammy Groom, like super introvert. And for me,
I will say that Saul did list Dylan. That was one of the names.
Yeah, of course. And for me, it's like that's the enjoyable part of coaching is seeing different folks and play on the same team and can they connect, and they're so different, and for me, like Dylan was one of my favorite people to coach. Like I had seen him. Like I love like I've been around, well, I've been around people enough to like understand like there's so much behind. Like you can't just judge people on their on-field persona.
Right.
There's so much
Right.
to people, and I love learning about that and being surprised. And I also love seeing how do those things mesh together. And Dylan definitely in his first year with us, like he brought a certain thing, and it brought a lot of different parts of our team together, right? And like Grant has talked about like how he was trying to take stuff from Dylan and trying to get to a different level. And so there's a lot there for me. That I'm excited by that difference and things that I get, and like I approach everyone differently. So I don't think like that's the binary that I would look as like those two personalities. And I like learning about folks. I would love to coach you kids for sure.
Hey,
Like and it was, like someone like Yacht, right? I had watched a lot of film on him. And then when you talk to that guy in person, it's such
he's a gentle guy.
Huh?
I think he's a gentle guy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you meet other quiet people and you're surprised about like what's going on in their head. So yeah, for me, that's the joy and excitement of coaching different folks.
When you said that there's so much more to people than their on-field appearance and just all of that, it's like so true. Sometimes like I even catch myself like I've definitely gotten better at like not doing this, but just like saying like watching someone play or playing against someone and being like, oh, I hate that guy or I hate that person or that person's a dick, like whatever it is. And then you meet them in person and they're just like this lovely, sweet human being. And you're just like, what? Like, why are we talking like this? Like Mike always says, I Frisbee hate you. And it's just like, it's so true. And like, even for Yacht, like why, like before I met Yacht, like watching him play, I'm like, that guy seems like kind of a dick. And then I was like roommates with him at AUDL All-Star Weekend. And we just like hit it off right away. And he's just like the sweetest dude. And it's just so crazy. And I think a lot of people do that, and myself included. And it's just like so interesting to, meet someone and actually judge them on who they are and not just like when they're in a super competitive environment that they've dedicated so much time and money and effort into something that they're super competitive about it. And it's fair enough. Like, I don't blame you for being that way on the field, because this is your life. Like, this is a huge part of your life. So it's really interesting. I don't have a question. It was just kind of another brain vomit for me.
I think that's the nice thing about national teams, and right, we should do a good job of like bringing more people, more representation into it, because I think that's important for our sport to understand. And in my experience, it doesn't make us less competitors when we get on our club teams. We still want to beat those other folks, but I think for me, bringing more understanding is always like increasing our understanding is really important, and being able to like see two sides at once is really important just in life and as human beings. So yeah, like there's so much value in that. And, like you all having this podcast, you're able to like, meet a lot of different people in our sport, and like, they're also able to show that different side of them, which I think is really important as well.
Yeah. It's been probably the best part of doing this, to be honest. We've just 100%. Gotten to meet and talk to all sorts of different people that we never would have been able to connect to.
Yeah. I have another question about tryouts in general too. And I've never been to a World Games tryout, so I don't really know what that structure is like. But at this past WGC tryout, I mean, it was the most intense, physically difficult, insane thing I've ever done. Like, it was too much, in my opinion. It was not a safe environment for people to be competing in my opinion. Did I have a great time? Yeah, I did. But it was so much. And it was to the point where I almost felt that it wasn't showing how conditioned you were and how ready you were for that, because it was beyond that. You couldn't prepare your body for something like that. So it was almost just like a battle of will in your mind at that point. So I'm curious, like what the deal is with that and why it's, I don't know if you know, but like why it's structured that way, and maybe, what the end goal of that is in general.
Yeah, I first of all, I would agree with you. Like, and the point is like the coaches are just right. Like, as we were talking before, it's an impossible choice, and they're just trying to get one more rep. And I think there is a fallacy in that, because that one more rep on Sunday isn't getting you a lot of information. I think there is information in the World Games levels, like we need a couple people with motors who can keep going, because it is actually like the World Games thing is really grueling. And there's always going to be a player, because of the gender ratios, that's doubling up on points, right? And so on our team last year, it was Grant, oddly, like one of our oldest players, and then
I was going to say,
You can
yeah.
run forever.
Kayla Helton, and they like just did it, and I tried it out with Jack in the beginning. I was like, oh, our young buck, but like, so there's a little bit of value in that, but I think the bigger picture, and something, part of my involvement this cycle is trying to look at big picture, and I think my ideal would be to have a standing group of national team members, and for us to run a weekend like we did there, where we do a couple of kind of like drills to get on the same page, and then we scrimmage, take a lunch break and scrimmage some more, and do that out of cycle. And then when we get in cycle, we can have it more as a tryout. But that would be way more, right? Like, that way I get more reps to see you two play. I can see you in different circumstances on different years, right? Like, you might be having a bad weekend. Like, I don't know. It also, for me would be, if I'm interested in an expansive skill set, like Yacht on his team does not get to cross match on a handler. There's no way you would ever do that, right? He's got to go out and sky kins, right? Like, that is going to be the job. And so, but if I'm asking that for Yacht and he only gets to do it during a World Games tryout, like, that's not fair. Like, we asked him to do that, and like by the end of that tryout, I was like, yeah, he actually works pretty well in there. Like, his mark is great, right? Like what would that person look like developing in there? And so I think that gives folks an opportunity outside of their club teams to practice these other things and do these other things that I think are super valuable. So that would be my ideal of once a year, getting folks to do that, finding a way to make that financially viable for folks, right? Like, can we get sponsorship where you don't have to pay for coaches and fields, or, and you have to pay a plane ticket to come out? But, for most people, they're like, that was one of the best weekends I've ever had. Would you be willing to do that, more often? And that's also a way for us to like bring in other folks, and like, we can be more intentional about like, yeah, we're getting X number of players from each one of these teams, right? There's some underrepresented teams just in general, even at the tryout.
Right.
And so, I think that would be the bigger picture, and that's limited by finances and logistics, really. So
What kind of pool would that be? That national team pool?
I think I would want it pretty big. I think it would, the starting point was like, okay, how many clubs do we have? Like, what are we looking in terms of like, are we looking for, top 4 or 5 players from each team? Are we looking for teams to send players, right? There could be a different thing. It's like, you all pick 5 players and send them to the national team camp. I think there could be many different ways. Like, for me, it's more the structure. Like, can we get you all together more often and not in a tryout situation? Because I actually think that would be more beneficial for our national team overall. And can we rotate through? And then when we get into cycle years, then like we need to be maybe a little bit more selective, but now we have better information.
We've actually had similar thoughts about even Bravo and Summit for UFA. A lot of the UFA teams, well, not a lot, I think a couple of them are running academies leading into tryouts, and this year we're trying to use our preseason for Bravo as a teaching time and more or less open tryouts, kind of like it's not a tryout, but it's more than just come and play small sided games. It's about engaging with the community and hopefully teaching. And right now we've got good buy-in from returning Bravo players or veterans of the previous teams and hopefully we have good success with that. But I think that's a really good idea if it could, work out financially, like you mentioned.
Yeah. It's funny. This is just like a short anecdote. Again, yesterday when Mikey Kins and Matty and I were hanging out, doing like the live stream we did, we were actually talking shit about my mark and how it's bad. And then I think Matty asked who has a really good mark. Someone asked who has like maybe the scariest mark, and I said yacht. So it's funny that you said his mark was really good because it's terrifying being marked by him. He's so big, like,
Big guy.
It's just huge.
You also can't see, like, he could just vision block you, like, legally.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I can't throw a backhand around yacht because I can't pivot far enough to see around him. So I just have to like throw a flick.
and I just think like a length like that poaching in the lane, right? Like you could like. There's a lot of exciting things you could do. And then on a mixed field, it was like, oh, I put him in the lane and then I have like this other player running, like I think there's a lot of interesting things to this. So for me, like as a coach, it would be really fun to like play around with like different folks in different positions in a non-evaluative pressure situation.
Totally. Yeah. It's a good way to learn too. I could definitely keep asking questions, but I was thinking we might move on to just some quick hitter fun stuff. And not keep you for the rest of your evening. Maybe Quinn and Kins, I'll just check to see if you have any.
I have one more question that I'm very curious about. That's like serious before we do quick hitter stuff.
Sure.
Pressure is something that like I think about a lot, and I'm sure tons of people think about a lot. And I'm curious how you, as someone who coached World Games teams, coaches WGC teams, coaches Fury, who's the most storied program ever. I'm curious how you yourself handle pressure and how you also help your team handle pressure and help specific players handle pressure.
Yeah, I think specific players, like to take that one first, is going to vary depending on their personality. And I remember 2013 World Games finals in Colombia, which was amazing. Seeing Opie Payne for the first, like this was her first championship, and like just seeing like the nerves and like just I don't even know what I said, but just talking to her beforehand. And then she went on in that year and then the following year to beat us in finals. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think one of my first, not my first year coaching for you, the second one, I remember like right before finals, I was like, God, I think I ate something bad. Like I just feel like super nauseous. And I was like, what's going on? I was like going by a garbage can. I was like, oh, I'm freaking out right now. And so like that was how unaware I was. And I think my first year I would just kind of like, everything was like new. And so like that first finals wasn't, but it was funny in 2007. I was like, oh, like what's going on? Yeah, I compare, like I love pressure situations because I think if you're doing it right, it just makes it so simple. Like I love double game point because it was like, it kind of like, you can't, if you're doing well, you can't think of anything else. It was like, well, this is this point. So, and I compare it for me as like, it's kind of like jumping off a diving board. Like you still get the butterflies and scary, but you also know it's going to be okay and you jump. And I think there's some aspect of that I've gotten to where it's not that I don't feel nervous, but the nervousness, I was like, oh yeah, butterflies are beautiful, right? Like if you're feeling that, and the helpful response to butterflies or pressure is to just like simplify your focus. And then for the team, like I'm always trying to make it, I think there's some aspect of, making it super simple. I mean, it's a cliche now for like the players that I coach, but I often do a national team is like, here we are. Like if the disc is in our hands, like let's keep it in our hands until we get into the end zone. If it's not in our hands, let's try to go get it. And then when it's in our hands, don't let it drop till it gets in the end zone. Like just going back and forth between those things. And there's not other strategy. It's really that simple. And then I think, there's other things practically. It was interesting. I was talking to, there's a handful of coaches that I occasionally just talk to on the phone who check in, and there's someone on a college program saying, yeah, we made it to we made it to the big game and we kind of freak out. And I was like, so, there is how as a coach you keep it simple, but then, there's different things, right? Like when you get to, club nationals, like you have this weird thing where ESPN, like, you get all fired up, like, right, your D line is frothing, and then they're like 8 minutes, and you're like, what do I do now, right? Or like you get to the semifinals and it's like you're gonna wake up at 7 and your game is at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna overamp the whole. What do you do, right? And so I think there's then practical things that you need to think about as a team and a coaching staff is like, how do you have the proper ramp? How do you deal with all that awkwardness, right? And so that's like stuff that you don't know until you're there. I was talking to that coach and he was like, yeah, we had no realization of that. And I was like, yeah, that's super awkward. And, here's some things that we've done. So yeah, it's a whole host of things. I think personally, like getting to that kind of state where you can focus on the right things, bringing that focus to your team. And then there's some structural things that you have to figure out because, right, your goal is to get that game to feel like any other game. And there are things that happen that game feels really different. Like suddenly you're in the stadium, right? Swirling wind, bathroom not in the same place, like all kinds of things. So
yeah, the weird lead up to those ESPN games where you have to like fake huddle.
Yeah.
God.
That reminds me of the 2014 Bravo team that won. They had the late semi and everybody went to the movie theater and just like take their mind off of everything. Yeah. And Bart Watson, who's one of my good friends, I was just telling this story to Matty yesterday, Matty Jackson. He had this crazy ability to just turn it off. Like, I don't know if it's because it was towards the end of his career, but I felt like he was just playing in a summer softball game. Like immediately after games would end, he would be like, "Hey, what are we eating? Are we getting barbecue, tacos?" And like he would have a beer at dinner, which I don't really see a lot of club people doing right now. But he's just like total decompress. It was like his mind just went somewhere else completely. And then when it was time to play, he just played the same way he always played. Okay. Maybe I'll ask you to actually, Kinsey, do you have any last?
No, I did not. I'm ready for the quick hitters.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask you to do the unthinkable and compare your children a little bit, not your actual children, but I mean, you've coached the dynasty of dynasties and all these worlds teams. Like, maybe I'll start simple. Do you have like a favorite memory coaching? And maybe it's not from any of these championship teams or anything that stands out.
I mean, I have so many memories and learning. So, I think one of my favorite memories was just kind of odd, and it was 2012 Worlds Japan and losing to Japan, but being in the stands and like thousands of people and a lot of like non-ultimate, right? Like there were grandmas fanning themselves. It was super humid.
Yeah.
And Japan was a team that was like kind of instrumental in kind of like my development as a coach. I started coaching against them in 2008 and a couple world championships, went to Japan to play a Dream Cup, like really loved their style of play. It helped me a lot. Like I went to 2009 World Games to observe and like, I had been thinking about a lot and was able to like scout for them. And their two captains were like Eddie Hirai is one of the best players, ultimate players ever. And people don't know, number 11. And yeah, like I have a picture of me with a silver medal and with those two players, those leaders with gold medals. And yeah, for me, it was this like very, like for me, like being able to see two sides and for me, like utter disappointment. And then just like the acknowledgement of how great like the Fury teams became because we played against the Japanese. And so, yeah, that's one of my favorite. And there's an awesome picture that you'll often see of Kayla Helton getting actually layout blocked by Eddie Hirai, and it's on it's around there. And so I wish I actually had that as a poster because it's an amazing moment. Two amazing players, and that was like Kayla like is fucking at the top of her game right now, and that was in 2012. Like think along how long like think about a player who's been playing that long and is playing at this level right now. Like her World Games year is insane, and she was doing this back in 2012, like as a young player.
What was she on like the 2007 Fury team? I kind of have this I don't remember. I remember being in Sarasota at the clubhouse after Fury had won, and I do remember Kayla with a gold medal celebrating. I think it was her first year on the team. There's no way she would remember this, but
Yeah, I don't remember. I have such a bad memory. I know she was on the 2000. I don't know what her first year is. I know that she was on Santa Barbara when she made the team. She could only make the mixer. She came out, had a huge layout grab, like block, lacerated her liver, crawled off the field, and then later on we're like, yeah, we're going to put her on the team.
yeah, she's still one of the best players in the world.
Yeah, shout out Kayla Helton. She probably the most fun I had playing with someone on the mixed field at World's Tryouts. So just personal anecdote again.
So that's so many memories. And coach so many players. Like, I don't know. I feel like shouting out like Nancy Sun is probably the most selfless teammate that we've ever had. Like, gives so much to the team. Has had an amazing career. But I think, it's like one of those things that you don't see behind the scenes of somebody who gives so much to the team. There's been I feel like I became a good strategic coach by the players that I coached, like watching them, and they might not know exactly what they're doing, but watching with them, trying to break down the thing that they're doing. And I feel like so much of my defensive knowledge came from watching great players, play D and then trying to like figure out what they were doing.
Matty Jackson just let me know that Kayla's first year on the team was 2010. So
2010, and we played Japan in club finals, double game point, 16-15 in Prague. That also was an amazing tournament. Yeah.
Yeah. There's only grainy footage of that.
That final game was, well, at the time I actually was super unhappy. Interesting. So we won 16-15, got on the shuttle. All these people were like, that's the best game we've ever seen. It was really cool because tons of European teams were there. Stands were filled. We had another all-time great, Manu Argeli, who is from Italy, but played on our team for those first 3 years and was like a European star. And so everyone was cheering, for her. And the Japanese crushed us defensively. Like, our offense sucked. And I think at that point, as a coach, it was kind of like a surfer looking for the perfect wave. I was always trying to have the perfect game. And I felt like I was depressed for like 4 or 5 hours after that, even though we had won, and I couldn't appreciate it. And I learned a lot from there, is that, against your best opponent. So I have a phrase now, is like being your best when you're not at your best. And against your best opponents, they make you feel like it's terrible. And how do you operate within that? Like, how can you still perform when like your first and second looks are taken away? Can you still like occupy that space and feel comfortable and get back to that thing? And so, again, another Japanese team that taught me a lot, like, for sure, as a coach.
These guys both know that I love the Japanese style as well. I've sent out a million buzz bullet clips to all the different teams I've coached. Okay, so maybe I won't ask you to compare too many more teams. I think that's probably too difficult. But how about just you've been coaching championship level teams now for 2 decades. How has the style changed, and have you had to adapt? Or I think you've been crediting your players a lot. Is that just something that naturally has happened?
I think talent and skill has changed for sure. Strategy has not, and I have a lot of thoughts about that. But right, like,
I had a question about that actually. But
we can get to that. But overall skill level is amazing, right? And like, I remember when we got our first juniors player, and Emily Damon, she had played 11 years. She went to Amherst, and that was longer than our vets, right? Like,
that's crazy.
That was crazy. Like, and so I came from an era where we didn't have any junior players. And I was like, Emily Damon, like, amazing player. Like, and had already played since like 11 years old. It was like, that's nuts. So, I think, some strategy changes, but I think mainly like, and then the dearth, the amount of footage, and I mean, you probably have that experience of like coaching way back when, and like we could get nothing, and now it's like there's too much footage, right? Like,
these guys also know that I've requested Ultiworld provide an all 14 angle from the drone. And somebody actually has a YouTube channel called all 14 Ultimate or something like that. And he reached out. It's like, is this what you're looking for? And I was like, absolutely. I would like to hire you.
Yeah.
What about like, so skill or strategies, and strategy not much different. What about like type of athlete? Have you noticed anything different there?
Well, I'm super interested. Yeah. I mean, I think more athletes, and then I'm super. I think for us, we are always like, oh, like the squirrely player, and right, like just thinking about like Brett and Henry Ing, like at the tryouts, like just watching those big bodies work in small spaces, and I was like, if we get more of those, like, how different is that going to be, right? And I even think like a skill set like Kin's, like a big thrower, a big person who can center handle, but then like you put a smaller person on them and can go deep. Like, I think those, like, we have more of those type of players, which I think is really exciting. And I think, gets closer to my kind of like thing of like seeing like people, like, I love to see people who can go deep and also play at the line of scrimmage. Like, and I like to see people who can defend that too. And so, there's a lot more of those type of athletes. And I think as throwing is better. And I think, I mean, I always tell them, I was like, can you get 10% better at throwing as opposed to 10% more fit? I mean, get both, but I just think like, there's more throwing ability. And I think, but we're still not there where we have, right? If everyone can access that break side of the field, like the defenses that we're running right now that are so strong side focuses suddenly become really challenged. And so, I think it'd be interesting to see like that happen, and like how defenses more sort of have to, adjust to that. So I think that's happening, and I think it could happen a lot more.
I'll feeding off of that. Then the other question that I had stored away was, where do you see the most space for innovation?
I mean, I think it's everywhere. And I think the problem right now, and I've talked about this, is like, if you're one of the top 3 or like top teams in the division, you're trying to beat another 4 teams. And so your incentive to innovate isn't so great, right? Because it's like, it's a very specific thing. Like, I need to beat this style from this team, this style from this team. And if I can do that, it kind of takes care of most of the thing. I think for me, for years, I always thought like when on the men's side in the Southwest, when it was Revolver and the Condors, I was like, if the Condor is like committed to just playing a really different style of offense or defense, like that might enable them to beat a superior team in terms of talent and skill. And so in some ways, like, unless there's somebody, like, I think it's really hard at the top level, or at least I found it hard at the top level to truly innovate, because the stakes are a little bit higher, right? Like, you have to have buy-in from your team. You have to buy in, like, of losing games during the season because you're working on this thing that hasn't been done before. And so maybe happening at college, like, I felt like I coached college for that many years, and I got a lot of chops, like just having a rapt audience who would do whatever I would say. So I spent a lot of time working on zones and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I'd be curious on what you all think, like where it would be going. I'm just stuck in like, I can't, like, I don't want to lose.
Yeah. What you said about the stakes being high is, resonates for sure. We're lucky to have Tim Kafalas, TK, who's innovating our defense. I think skill can still jump another level, like you were mentioning. When we're trying to just even design workouts for the team, and like most bang for the buck. Like I think people are spending more time on their fitness, which is a good thing, but are not incorporating the skill as part of their training. Like you see a LeBron workout or a basketball workout, and they're working up a sweat, taking shots and going through post moves or whatever. I guess nobody works in their post moves in the NBA anymore, but
5 out.
Yeah, you can imagine.
This is interesting too, because what I see a lot is athletes that are really good at being athletes working on their athleticism when they're maybe not the greatest throwers. Or on the other side of it, really good throwers throwing a lot, but not working on their athleticism when they're not great athletes. So I feel like players fall into the trap of working on the thing that they're really good at and not working on the thing that maybe could use work. And so they fall into the trap of being then specialized and pigeonholed as opposed to trying to well-round their game, which is, people want to do the things that they're good at. That's what's more fun. But maybe for their game, they want to work on things they're not so good at.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's always like when you lose, the people were like, "Oh, we weren't in shape enough." Those are the people that like work out. Like we don't have enough skill. And those are people like are throwing for an hour, but like not working out. So
if we never turned it over, we wouldn't have to run so much. I've one story that also you made me think of before we wrap up here, and maybe Quinn and Kins, maybe we'll try to do a finer thing. So, Matty, I don't know if you know what a finer thing is. Actually, Quinn, would you mind explaining what a finer thing is, and then I'll tell my story, and then
Yeah. So the finer thing is it was kind of born out of like my last name, I guess. And it's just like something small in your life, and it can be an experience or it can be an item that makes a really big difference in your life or is just really pleasurable. So like, and the weirder they are, the better they are. It kind of seems like the more unique to you. Like, I think the best example of one that's like kind of weird and unique to me is after let's say we play 4 games on a Saturday and it was 90 degrees and we're all destroyed. I've left my Crocs in the sun for 8 hours and I put my feet in them and they're super warm and they're super extra squishy because they're just being baked all day. So it's just like this like out of body experience of taking my feet from my cleats into my squishy Crocs. So that's like kind of an example, just like a weird experience that makes a big difference in your life.
So I'll give you a second to mull one over, and hopefully you can come up with something. Maybe I always do this. I kind of give 2 finer things, but one of them is related to you mentioning, I guess, fond memories over losses. Before I coached at Colorado and all the other teams in the state, I used to coach the University of Iowa women's team, Saucy Nancy. And they had a long drought, and then we had some pretty great success in 11, 12, and 13 quarters, semis, lost to Oregon every year. While Lou was there coaching, of course. They had amazing players too. But there was this moment of clarity. It was actually Nationals was in Boulder 2012, the second time we lost to Oregon, where we were actually up 14-12, I think. Or maybe we were up 14-13 and had the disc on the goal line to win, but turned it over. I remember they called a timeout. I think it was Bailey. What was her name? Bailey Sonnheiser. Sonnheiser was like isolated in the lane. I'm not 100% sure who threw it. I want to say Schaffner, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was like they line up with a side stack, isolated. I think they isolated Bailey. She just goes deep. They huck it to her. Liza Minor was on her, and Liza was like one of our best players, if not our best player. They convert, and they're breaking us to win as well on Universe, which was a huge bummer. But like I knew like in the moment that I hadn't really prepared them for that situation, and which sounds like a strange. It's strange that I had this moment of clarity afterwards that were it. Even though we lost and I felt like we should have won, it felt like we did everything that we possibly could have, and we lost to a better team, and it was also like, at that point I wasn't used to living in Colorado, so the Pleasant View Fields complex like kind of overlooked the Flatiron, so I had that aesthetic to sort of feel that feeling of peacefulness and immediate acceptance of such a crushing loss. But it's interesting how some of those moments can come after such a heartbreak. And I'll transition that into my finer thing. Actually, there's no clear transition. Lately, my finer thing has been, unlike you, Matty, I am on social media and I've been scrolling through Instagram, and for some reason Instagram has been feeding me a lot of penguin videos of just like little penguins marching along, some from like a drone view, and there's like always like some funny music to it, and you see their little waddle or them like diving head first onto the icy snow. And like, I've never been a penguin person. I do love animals, but for some reason I've now become obsessed with them, and I treat myself in the morning to a series of penguin videos, and it kind of gets me going in the right way.
That's so
Seems
good.
like a Kiko Socks type of theme.
We are half sponsored. Not
There you go.
Yeah.
The finer things segment used to be sponsored by Kiko
By
Sock.
Kiko.
Yeah.
We stopped doing the ad read. No. I can go. So mine recently, I feel like we've done so many that's kind of turned into just like Mikey kind of said, like recently. It's like, but mine recently has been like having something that just envelops my entire life, i.e. Frisbee. It's like the example is Frisbee, and being able to disconnect more so than just like having an off season. Like after Worlds tryouts, I've just tried to completely disconnect from Frisbee and just chill a little bit, which is really, really hard for me because I'm obsessed with Frisbee and I can't get enough of it. And my finer thing has just been able to disconnect from Frisbee and just chill and live my life outside Frisbee and realize that like there's a lot of amazing things outside of Frisbee in my life. And I've been really trying to do that lately, and it's been great. So that's my finer thing lately.
It's a healthy balance for you,
Nice,
Quinn.
Yeah, that is good.
Kins, you got one today?
Yeah, I think mine will be from today when I really like the feeling of cleaning up and then sitting on the couch after you clean, and just like it's a very
Fuck yeah.
a good sense of relaxation. Like it's kind of like after you've done anything, but once you get to bask in like your somewhat more tidy space, I really enjoy that finer moment.
I can relate to that one too.
On
the spot here.
I think for Frisbee oriented, I love winning the field. So I love after games are over, just sitting in my seat and like watching. And it doesn't happen anymore because people don't win the fields. That actually used to be Lou Burris's blog. So from that era, like
2 hours.
Yeah, we would just sit there for, like hours and hours, have a cooler, have stuff ready, and just sit there till the sun goes down. So my team knows that too. Like I love cagging and I love watching. Like I like hijinks and all that kind of stuff, which sadly doesn't happen as much in our sports anymore. And then like at home, I'm a huge cook. So 2 things. I love making sourdough bread and feeling like the visceral thing of like actually turning the dough. And then I sharpen knives on
my
like
brother-in-law
chopping
does
stones,
that.
and like
Yeah.
the sensation and then the sound. Like I don't listen to music when I do it because like you need the feedback of like hearing, and there's something very visceral. So those 2 little things are like, yeah.
That's nice.
Those are good. No, those were good. Those are great. Do we want to get producer Matty Jackson in on a?
I would love a Matty Jackson.
Yeah, if Matty would like to pop in here, and while while we wait, Matty, Tsang, I'll have to send you a photo. My brother-in-law has a huge Japanese knife collection, and
really?
he loves knives. That's a weird sentence. And whenever he visits me, he sharpens my knives.
Yeah, I do that too. I carry my stones with me. In my in-laws' house, sharpen their knives. I sharpen a lot of like when they sharpen knives, like a lot of Furies bring their knives over. So
That's great. That's great. All right, producer Matty Jackson, our first episode with you. Do you have a final thing for us?
Thanks for having me, guys. This has been nice. Mine's super basic, but every day that I come home from work, my German Shepherd Ellie is so excited to see me, and she's 10 now. But whenever I get home every day, she like runs around and kind of has this really puppy-like energy. It just makes me so happy. So I know that's really basic and a little lame, but it's my
No,
final
that's
thing.
such a good one, Matty. I was mulling that one over. I decided to go with the cleaning one, but the dog one is so good.
I thought you were going to say when you get home you have like a diet soda,
That's
and
what I
that was
thought.
going to be your. That's what I was waiting for.
I have diet sodas all day, so
Oh, so it's not even a final thing; it's just a part of life.
it's just
a
a
thing.
part of life.
It's a thing.
It's funny you brought up winning the fields, Matty. That was like my childhood growing up. It was like not what you want to do as a 12-year-old at Edgeley Fields.
your parents are just like,
Oh my God. Parents and other parents just like drinking, and like it was a thing at Edgeley to like win the fields. And oh boy. But I think that definitely I ended my parents' times of winning the fields because there was simply no way that I was staying that long.
The Kins fits.
I mean, it wasn't I was like 12. I have things to do.
All right, Matty, Mattys, but especially Matty saying, thank you so much for being here. This was truly an honor. I don't want to fanboy too much, but definitely have looked up to you from a distance for a long time. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thanks for putting this on.
All right, guys.
All right.
Yeah, peace out.
See ya.